Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. This is a good time. If you want to suggest an episode to us and you're on Off the Floor, do it now. We got another 2 weeks before we get to the heavy training camp stuff, so we'll certainly take your suggestions. Also, again, get our updates before that you see them anywhere else. $2.99 per month. It's election season. It's Tyreek Hill season. Talk Heat over on Off the Floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Legal in the state of Florida. Again, Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Put down $5 and play it. They'll give you 50. That's right, 10-1. You're not getting that deal at Walmart. Put down the 5, get 50. Use the code 5 FIVE to get that done. PrizePicks.com. Full NFL slate, including Dolphins Bills on Thursday. So get in there today. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne.
Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
Wow. It's definitely still the offseason. Welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on Five Reasons Sports. I got Brady Hawk. You can follow him at Brady Hawk 305. All right. Make sure that you check out our top 40. Greg and I went through the entire thing. Alex and I discussed it on the last episode. I thought he was going to make a stronger case for Michael Beasley and having left him off. But anyway, if anybody has any thoughts on that and everything that we got wrong, you certainly can send them our way on Twitter or on Off the Floor. Brady and I are going to transition back to the current team here. And there's a topic that I've actually wanted to play around with for a while, and I think you're the right person to go through this one with, is that when it comes to playing young players, and we're going to encounter this situation this year because the Heat have 2 draft picks, both of whom impressed in various ways in summer league, in Kel'el Ware and Pelle Larsson, and they also have in Keyshawn Johnson an undrafted who looks like the latest in their sort of assembly line of wings. Stretch. I don't want to call him a stretch 4 because he's going to need to improve that 3-point shot for that to be the case, but playable players who can plug into a rotation, that they seem to have found another one, at least one. We'll see with Isaiah Stevens if he ends up getting that 2-way later on. But there's this perception of the Heat, and it comes from the Pat Riley days, and it has sort of extended to the Erik Spoelstra days, that they don't give as much grace or room to young players to play early. And I think that's a false narrative. And so I want to address that narrative with you, but I also want to get into what is the best approach with young players and how much should they play early and how much of playing early leads to their development. How much does it help or hurt the team? And how does it end up playing out for them later on? Because I have a theory, again, about the way that they handle players and why I think it works. But it also drives fans crazy in the process of it. Okay, so let's start here, Brady. All right, Pat Riley had a reputation for not playing young players. It was just that was the way it was. Now, part of this started because he inherited a team in Los Angeles that had no need for young players. They had Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy, Byron Scott. Okay, Michael Cooper. There was no need to. Oh, they got their young players. They got Worthy with the number 1 overall pick of the draft, which was this crazy trade. Again, Magic was an elite. I mean, he was elite as a young player. He scored 42 points in the finals as a rookie, but that he was not drafted while Riley was the head coach. Okay, but he was already a developed player by the time Pat came in. So he went there, and then he went to the Knicks, who there was an expectation of kind of winning right away. And he did find a couple of sort of diamonds in the rough, Anthony Mason and John Starks in particular, who were sort of passed over by other teams. So there were young players played, but they also traded for older point guards like Derek Harper, Doc Rivers, etc. Okay, and Ewing was an older player. Comes to Miami, has a semi-young player in Rice, but flips him for Mourning, who was only 25 at the time. Young player, but Zoe had been the number 2 overall pick in the draft and had already emerged as a star level player, and he just had a dispute with Charlotte, and that's how Pat was able to get him. Okay, but during the Zoe Tim years, he did play some young players. He played Deshaun Leonard started a lot of games as a young player. He played young players. Okay, didn't play a ton of them, but he played young players. But he trusted veterans. He trusted guys, in their 30s, okay, to sort of do the right things. Spo comes in, and again, I'm passing over certain eras here, but with Shaq and Wade, Haslam started as a rookie some games. That was under Stan in 03. But then in 04, in the second season, Stan started him from jump with that team as a second-year player. He was a regular power forward, and then when Pat took over, Udonis remained the starter, okay, even though they had Antoine Walker at that point, and they ended up playing Antoine at the 3, so that Udonis Haslem in his second year could be the starting power forward. And then Erik Spoelstra, first year, Mario Chalmers as a rookie, second-round rookie, starts 82 games. Now, Michael Beasley started a lot, not maybe as much as maybe people wanted him to, but there was a reason for that, and it was shown when they went back to Haslam, okay, and say in Beasley's second season. All right, so all the way up through at the very beginning and until the Big 3, they played a ton of young players. Norris Cole, drafted in the second year of the Big 3, was a regular in a rotation of a team contending to win a championship. And he was an 80-game type player. And then we've seen it since with Spo. Justice Winslow, Josh Richardson played a ton as rookies, although mostly off the bench. That was in 2015. Tyler Hero, major contributor as a rookie. Bam Adebayo was playing behind Hassan, but played a lot as a rookie, even though they didn't play much together. So I'll start here with you, Brady. It's my first question. Do you think Erik Spoelstra what is, in your view, his record of playing young players? What would you say his predilection is to make them wait or to play them at the start?
I think it definitely depends how ready the player is, and I think it's all depending on those specific guys. I mean, if there was a case to be made about the direction Spo goes, I don't think it's against young guys because a lot of the time he only has the available players he has, and he just plays whoever's on his bench. But if anything, it's about the bigs, and I think that's kind of where I think most people look. So that now when you're working at a rookie that's young and a big man, and everybody's trying to push him to play next to Bam, and I think that's where this thing could get interesting and kind of see the way he goes. But I think when you are a team that is kind of projected to be in this playing range and you're trying to kind of make that jump into a top 6, I don't think you can be a team like you were talking about those different teams over the Heat tenures that can lean on complete veterans, because the complete veterans will get it done in the playoffs. It'll get done down the stretch of the season, maybe post All-Star break, but it's going to be hard to get a lot of these veterans on game 1 through 20 to be as engaged as you want them to be when they know what the road ahead is and they're trying to peel back a little bit and all this stuff. So you kind of have to lean into that. I'll say this. I think the way they deal with certain rookies, it almost definitely does depend on the player. Like you were talking about Rio, confident as ever. Tyler, confident as ever. Jaime, super confident as well in his rookie season. And then I look at some of these other guys like Jovic, for example, not to say he's not confident, but I think he needed that tenure in Sioux Falls where Jimmy went there and propped him up. I think he needed that boosted confidence to kind of get things under his belt a little bit. And then he came in and he kind of performed at a high level. I just think it's more so of a mindset of a player thing that when you get kind of like not only the NBA ready guy like Jaime because he was in college for 4 years, but just guys with that certain mindset that think they can come in and are the best player on the floor immediately, that Tyler had that mindset and just came in as a killer. There's more confidence from a coaching staff to like play that guy. So we'll see where Kel'el Ware fits in. We'll see how like his mindset is. And if he feels like it's not a tough big man room, like he has the opportunity to really gain that backup big spot. And I think the point of this episode as well was like, when you look around this team and it's like seeing the position they're in, you're kind of saying to yourself, like, no matter what it is, let Kel'el Ware play through the mistakes. Let him figure it out early in the season. don't waste time, trying to, put yourself in a position to keep him, like let him learn on the bench or send him to Sioux Falls and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, you're 30 games into the season and now you're trying to funnel him in. Like, let him just work out certain things and you can figure it out later, because you're not in a position that you have to keep him behind a certain backup big. You don't have to play a Thomas Bryant or a Kevin Love. So the Kel'el Ware one's interesting just because of your thing about the young guys, but also because of the history of just playing 7-footers in general, playing bigs defensively that may, be a question mark for that end.
Well, because I think there's more responsibility in the defense for the bigs. I think that's part of it. Right? I mean, is that fair? That there's more. I mean, Bam handles all of it so easily that it's better than anybody could. That I think we take it for granted.
I mean, he played Precious, but he was a bit undersized. Like they kind of felt at certain points they could switch with him. Like he wasn't just a straight drop big. And I think that's kind of the thing. It's like when you're dealing with a strict drop big, that's when it feels like they're a little like more hesitant. But I do think, like, I don't want to sound like he is a complete question mark defensively, because the upside defensively is there. The question mark I'm referencing is that how will he look at the beginning of a regular season if you're immediately throwing him out there into the fire? How is he going to look translating from what he did in college to like now really defending legit pick and roll combos and having to like deal with all of that? Like I think it's eventually going to get there, but that's where the learning curve comes in, and that's where Miami's evaluating, saying like, do we want to throw him out there in the fire? Do we make him wait? Do we just let him roll and just figure it out and deal with like getting scored on a ton and just let him kind of learn? That's the question. But I really do believe the position that they are in, I say this word all the time, they need something new. They need like something fresh on this roster, that if you start early in the season and things look rough and it's because you have like one of the bigs from last year playing as your backup big, I think that it's almost better if like you're rolling your second unit out there and Jimmy's playing with Ware, and at least he has something new to deal with and kind of has something in the back of his head where it's like, okay, there's an upside play later in the season that if this guy figures it out, we're a little bit better. So it does feel like they are in a position where they have to lean into that.
I want to use Jovic as the primary example here because I think it encapsulates what the arguments are on all these sides. Because to me, there's really like 4 considerations, and some of them are in concert and some of them are against each other. And the considerations are: what's best for this particular team right now? What's best for this particular team and franchise in the future? What's best for this particular player right now? What's best for this particular player for his future? Okay. I mean, to me, those are the 4 things that you're considering, because it takes into account like where you are as a team. Because if you're a contending if you're a non-contender, okay, and I would not call the Heat a non-contender. They're not definitely a contender, but they're not one of those teams that is not competing for anything in its mind this year. Okay. It's not Charlotte, Detroit, Washington, Brooklyn, etc. Right? Okay. It's not even really Chicago or Atlanta. It's in another level, but we just haven't really figured out how high up in a tier they can get, because we haven't really figured out how many of these guys are actually going to play. All right. That's where I'm at with it. So I think when you look at it, you take those 4 things into consideration. So let's talk Jovic here real quick, because I think that this plays into all of it. So you go into last season, and I was told before last year that it could be a redshirt year for him. Okay. His second year could be a redshirt year. Because again, his first year, he was trying to get his body right. First, he was trying to put on weight. He had the back injury that held him back and all the rest of that. Right. Okay. So going into last year, you would say, okay, what's best for the team early on? Probably not playing him. Right. Like if we take that first category, like if they had plugged him in to that team early in the season, Caleb was coming back from injury, was sort of a little bit off. They brought Highsmith back. They had different guys rotating at that 4 spot. Do you think, and we'll go through these quickly, and then after the break, I want to expand on it more, but do you think it would have benefited the Heat with where Jovic was in his particular development to have played him more in the first 30 games of last season?
I think so. I mean,
okay.
Fans were calling for him starting, I feel like, last year for weeks on weeks on weeks before he actually got that nod. Like, I don't think a lot of people expected them to even go in that direction. Like, people were calling for it. But like getting put in a legit starting lineup at the 4 next to Bam, like that was a pretty crazy elevation from where he was in Sioux Falls a couple weeks ago.
So how would he have played then? That's my question. Like for the team where it was, if you were talking early in the season, because they sent him to Sioux Falls because they felt like there might be minutes at the 5 for him. That's why, I mean, one of the reasons they sent him there, they were like, okay, we want to carve out something for him so that it said he can get some playing time. And then, again, they didn't end up going that direction. I just don't know where he would have played early with that team. They weren't going to put him, like you said, elevating him to the starting 4 the beginning of the season when, again, you had Caleb coming back off an Eastern Conference Finals performance like that.
Yeah.
And you had Highsmith. So I don't think that was plausible just from a team perspective.
Yeah, but like it was still in a similar position to what we're talking about this year, where they kind of are in that middle ground where I feel like you find a spot for the young guy just to kind of find a direction. Like you got to try to find something to push you over the edge in the regular season. And at that point, they had Kyle, so you kind of have the ability that he was somebody at that point that wasn't really shooting and he was playing off the ball. That putting Jovic at the 4, especially probably more with Kyle than it is with Terry, can have the ball in his hand a ton, and he can find ways to learn. And it's tough. I think it's definitely a tough position, but this is why it's a good example. Jovic is a good example compared to Ware, because Jovic, it was tougher to find a spot because they didn't even know what position he was going to be in. Like he wanted to be a 4, they wanted him to be a 5. Like it was all crowded because of the depth. This same team has depth right now, but there's not a clear backup 5. Like there's not a clear backup big, so like it's less clouded. It's just less clouded on the roster for a guy to step in. So it's more likely that Ware can find a spot. But Jovic is just a good example because he's the one guy where they did wait and it did pay off. Like, because as much as we say about wanting him to play, I really do believe like that whole thing that played out with Jimmy that kind of propped him up and was kind of always with him constantly. And the fact that Jimmy was somebody that really put it out there that he was not a 5. Like Jovic saying he's not a 5 is like at the time was like Yurtsevin saying he's a starter. Like nobody really listened to it. It was just something a player said and you moved on. But when your top player starts saying, okay, this guy can legitimately play for us, and this guy's a 4, he's not a 5, or you're using him wrong, people listen. So like I think when you're that part of it matters. That was just a different circumstance because I don't know how much that will happen specifically. But I do believe you got to play certain players. And I will say, though, it is tough. Like, it's easier said than done because as much as you say Miami's in this middle ground where they're not in that first tier, but they're not in that bottom tier, they're in this tier where they do have a lot of players. They have a lot of playable guys. So, like, a guy like Pelle, for example, like, we want them to play their young guys. We want to play a guy like Pelle, possibly. I don't know where he fits in because they just have so much depth there where, like, I guess the veteran versus young guy debate would be like a Burks versus Pelle, right? Like that would be the kind of debate. Like, are they going to go with the known shooter that could step in and play his role consistently? Or do we go with the guy that could kind of play in many roles and kind of fit into a Caleb type role? And we're going to see if he can develop into that. Like that's more of the question to me is the Pelle and Keyshawn. But Keyshawn, I will say, I think Keyshawn's more so like if Haywood's out. Like that feels like Keyshawn's role to me this season. I don't know if that'll move off of that. Pelle's more of the oddball where he could kind of be thrown in whenever.
I want to go more into these last 3 questions regarding the Jovic debate because I think, again, it plays into what you're talking about some of these other young players. Before I do, we got a great new sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We want to introduce them here. You're going to be hearing a lot about them. They're sponsoring throughout the network. We love working with our local sponsors here as well as the nationals, but particularly the locals because we are a South Florida brand. Particularly in Broward and Dade and Palm Beach counties. So we're introducing you to the real estate shop. Okay, this is Javier Iglesias and his wife Amanda Martin. And what they can do for you is they can help buyers and sellers in real estate with an honest, approachable, and smart approach to everything. They serve the entire Tri-County area, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. With their proven on-market strategy, homes are sold faster than the industry average. Their understanding of the market trends ensures listings are priced right and marketed effectively. They're dedicated to ensuring a smooth and enjoyable home buying and home selling journey. So reach out to them on Instagram at the Fort Lauderdale Realtor or give them a call at 954-268-9812. Again, that's 954-268-9812. or at the real estate shop, that's with 2 P's in it, the real estate shop, FL.com. All right. So the second question, first thing it becomes, okay, how does this help the team right now? Right. The second question being asked with the young player is, how does it help the team in the future? So some of that is you're building an asset, right? Not just for yourself, but potentially for a trade. Although I know they're not going into that into this season with Kel'el Ware with that thought process. But in every way, you're trying to build a player who has organizational value for you, either on the court or in the future. And for some players, it benefits the organization for them to get those looks early and become part of the program earlier because maybe they become an asset earlier. So that's one other thing to consider. The other thing is with somebody like Jovic is that when you look at his future for them, he filled a position need that this franchise has had for a long time, right? Like you mentioned, they drafted Precious. It was pretty clear early on that they weren't going to play him with Bam a lot. Other than that spot next to Bam has been the rotating spot for this team, right? It's been, I mean, they went out and got Jake. I mean, they tried Mo Harkless, and this is not in order, obviously, but Myers Leonard, Mo Harkless, Jay Crowder, PJ Tucker, Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith. Okay, a lot of carbon copy type players in there. Myers was kind of the exception because, again, he was a spot up shooter at the 5. Okay, not really a shot blocker, anything like that. More of a spacer for Bam. But again, they've tried to fill this role, and the one type of player we've said, a lot of us have said that they need is a type of player like Jovic, somebody who was big enough, okay, even if physicality is not his game, they can make him into a functional defender, which they started to do late last year. And he could space the floor until Bam was ready to do that. And also play make from that position, which would take some of the pressure off of Bam. So if you didn't have the PJ Tucker type, who was kind of the prototype of sort of that stocky, box out, allow Bam to get the rebounds type player, be able to defend everybody along with Bam. If you didn't have that, Jovic kind of a prototype. So for the team's perspective, he's somebody that they need to be careful with. First, he's a first-round pick, that they don't screw up his development because he can fit everything that they need, and those players are difficult to find. But then it pivots into this. What's best for the player? And this is where I really wanted to go with this, because the fans in the organization are often going to be at odds on this, because fans just want the guy to play. Like you said, they want somebody new, right? And this goes all the way back to the Beasley thing in 2008. Beasley was a higher pick than Jovic. He was picked 2nd overall. But the fans wanted not only him to play, but him to be featured along with Dwayne right away because of what they'd seen in college. And the reality is it wasn't really best for the team, and it didn't turn out to be best for Bees for him to play so early because he was playing when he really didn't know what he was doing. And we can argue whether or not that hurt his long-term career. But the Heat tried then to pull back, put Haslam back in the starting lineup, but Beasley had developed all these bad habits at the pro level that he never really got out of. I would make the argument that last year they handled Jovic perfectly because they made him earn it, okay, which you always want to do with a young player. But they also integrated him back at a time where they needed his skill set so that they could use it. But they also had the room. They had the room to allow him to play some of the ways that he wanted to play. But he also had an entire sort of season to figure out, okay, if I'm going to play with this group, I need to be better positionally defensively. And I need to be able to make spot up threes because that's where they're going to use me the most, even if my skill set is mostly with the ball in my hands and all that. And then they gave him a little bit of room in transition to kind of make those plays as a creator. I think they handled it perfectly, and I would make the argument if they'd handled him differently, they wouldn't have gotten the results they got from him in the last third of the season, which were the kind of results that we were looking for and the kind of results that he can build on this season. Is that do you think, I guess that's a question, do you think he would be at the level he's at right now, which we all agree he's going to be a big factor for them this season, if they had pushed him out there sooner?
Probably not. And part of that is because, look, earlier in the season, even last year, he was banged up. Like, he wasn't fully healthy as well, and it would have been rough. Like, them just working with him behind the scenes, I think probably was for the best. And your point about, like, making him earn it, I think is important because they do that with everybody. Like, everybody, they just test and just try to see if they'll do it. Like you said with the starting lineup this year, that they have possibly two starters. 2 locked-in starters. Like, they really don't, but they want to make these guys really go out there and earn it in camp and not kind of go through the motions because they're the starter on the team and just all of that stuff. Same thing with Jovic. Like it's kind of a situation where you kind of put this guy in a position that, okay, yeah, you were a first round pick, but we could send you to Sioux Falls as well to kind of work on your game. Like, you're not against it. And he went there, he did it, he had no problems with it, and they're like, he played really well, and all of a sudden he's back on the roster and he's starting all of a sudden. So I think a lot of this time they're just testing these guys, and you just kind of see how they deal with it. But Jovic is kind of the good example as well. Like, we keep saying that, but it is a good example because of that reason. Because the way the season went and kind of the low to the highs, Ware will be in a different position as well, because I don't know. Either, I'll ask you this. Do you think they can do that with him, though? Do you think they can do what they did with Jovic last year? Do you think they're in a position where they can do that with Ware, where they can swing back by like halfway to three quarters of the season and then work Ware in? Like, because he also had a different type of summer league. Like, he had a pretty good summer league as well. That it's just a different scenario here. So I'm just curious what you think. Is it similar?
I agree with you about the idea of needing to inject something fresh for this team. And that gets into the first question I asked, is what is best for this team at this moment? Where I do feel like if they roll out the same basic core, there's going to be some changes to it. We mentioned, Burke's coming in, that's a little bit different. But beyond that, you got Josh coming back, possibly to the back end of the rotation. And so if they're going to play a lot of Kevin Love and Thomas Bryant behind Bam Adebayo, then I do think that it's not just going to be an issue with the fans, which it's going to be. It's going to be an issue too, I think, with the team ultimately, because again, I think we know that this group, unless they get a high upside pop from somebody in addition to a motivated Jimmy, that they're probably not going anywhere in the Eastern Conference this year. So it's like I think we're counting on these unknowns to kind of change the trajectory of this season, right? We're counting on somebody being better than they should be at this stage. So whether it's Ware or Larsson, or again, maybe it's Rozier, is right from jump this year, is shooting the ball the way he shot towards the end of last season, gives you that different dynamic. They need something. You're right. It can't just be what we saw last year and just account on a health of some of those players. It's got to be more. So I'm with you on that. Okay. But I do think it could be a lot like the Jovic situation because of what I said about making a guy earn it. And I think that with this particular player, as opposed to Jovic, the big question, and opposed to Hawkins, who we should discuss right before we close on this, okay? The big question on him was motor. That's a want-to issue, right? Now, he satisfied them with his workout. When I asked him in New York, I said, how did your workout go? And he pointed to his hat, which was a Heat hat. So it obviously they saw enough of the motor there, and we saw the motor at times was pretty good in summer league until I thought he got completely worn down by the end, and his last game was not good. And so I think that there will be questions about that, and I think the team, and it's not Beasley, okay, it's not to that extent, but I think the team is going to want to see him push through, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and they test their rookies like this, and it's kind of like, look, again, with Mario Chalmers, they didn't have a lot of choice. Like, they were coming off a 15-67 season, okay? They drafted Beasley and Chalmers. Chalmers wasn't even a point guard in college. God bless him. We love Chris Quinn. They weren't going to turn over another 82 games to Chris Quinn as a starter, okay, or 82 games, and he was the backup for Rio, okay? They wanted to see the younger player and see what happened, and Rio ended up developing into a guy who was a core player for them on championship teams. I think they handled Mario Chalmers correctly that year. Just throw him out there, let him learn the position. They were coming off 15-67 with a rookie head coach. There were no expectations. Like, Dwayne had to have like one of the greatest seasons of the past 20 years, a season that probably should have gotten an MVP award, for them to get to the playoffs and get to the first round. Nobody was projecting playoffs for them in 08-09. All right. So I understand how they handle this. For this team, they're kind of, as we've talked about, caught in the middle. Like, they could get some upside pops, be interesting. Jimmy could be, Jimmy, and then they make trades to get better at the deadline instead of kind of pivoting around Bam and going that direction. And so I do think there's value to playing Ware, but I also think they're going to make him earn it, because I think that the overriding concern here is going to be his long-term development, and forcing him to go through some of those obstacles and challenges early, like they did with Jovic. I think they'll view that as the way to go. I think that, and I want to get to you on this. I think that on Jaquez, there were none of those concerns. Like they know Jaime's motor is like that. Maybe his like. I mean, Jimmy says his own motor, his own sort of want to desire is his superpower, right? I think it is with Jaquez also. So they didn't have any worries about that. And it's just throw him out there and let the kid like swim. All right. I don't think they felt that way with Jovic, and I think with Ware, they're not going to feel that way either. So I think they're going to handle Ware more like Jovic.
In some ways, though, with Jaquez, it's so much easier to do with wings. Like even guards, it's more difficult because sometimes like when a guy's undersized or it's just he has the ball in his hands a lot more. When you're a wing that is big enough to defend and switch around, and he has the polished offensive game that he had, like it was just hard not to play that guy. And it wasn't like the room wasn't crowded. Like they had Jimmy, Caleb, and Haywood, and they still played. So I think a lot of times the position probably doesn't even matter, and it's just if you're good enough I really do think a confidence is the key with these rookies because it really does feel like that's the translating factor. Like if you have that mindset and you're like a really confident player that feels like you play at this level, like you're gonna get out there at some degree. I'll say this though, the other thing I wanted to add, kind of my main take on a lot of this is not just about these guys playing early in the year, but I think the reason why you want to see them play early in the year, because I think especially on a team with depth, you got to find combinations that work. So like if you're halfway through the season and you're trying to fit in Ware, like I think Ware maybe it's a little bit easier because he is the 5-man, and I don't think they're going to rush into the Bam Ware stuff. But I do think like combinations are going to matter more than anything this year. It's not just about strict rotation. They have to find lineups that work. And it's crazy to say that. I know everybody's probably thinking they have the same team. How are they still looking for combinations? But I think the injury stuff kind of derailed it. Terry Rozier not really playing with Tyler a lot of games or certain guys a lot of games. Like I do think like finding 2-man groups or 3-man groups or finding like guys that play really well together, just like they did last year with two of the guys that played most of the games, Jaime and Duncan. They ended up playing really well together and they found a combination that worked. And all of a sudden in most lineups, Jaime and Duncan were glued together and they played really well offensively. That's what you kind of have to find with a lot of these young guys. Jovic, when he came back, I keep mentioning Jimmy propped them up, but he played really well with Jimmy. Like he fits his style because they both want to run down the court and play the break a little bit faster, and they just play a similar style that they fit really well. That's what the case is going to be with Ware. It's like looking around and seeing who does he play well with. That's going to be the key in camp because it's like the guy I think is going to end up being the guy that plays the best with Ware is Terry Rozier. Just because lob factor, just because he kind of plays his type of big man style on the roll, like we've always seen it. I think they're going to play really well together, and that's kind of going to be the staggering thing is you're going to see more lineups with Terry in the bench. I keep saying that, but they've always staggered. It's like, okay, one of Jimmy or Bam or Tyler with the reserves. I think you're going to see a lot of Terry with the reserves this year. So my main take is like it's not just about them playing, it's playing with the right lineups and playing with the right guys. Right. And if they're healthy, they can kind of get to that early in the season.
It's going to be an interesting thing because it plays into everything we've talked about this year, which is like, what do they think their direction is? And from the start of the season, their direction is going to be, we're going to try to compete. That's where they're at. I think they're going to try to compete until it becomes clear, if it does, that they can't. And even at 11-30 in 2016, they won like 3 straight games and decided, okay, let's try to compete. Literally at 14-30. So it takes a lot for them to drop that. And they're not going to tank anyway. We know that that's not the direction that they go. And they couldn't. I like they're bad at it. And this is a bad year to be bad at that if you want to do that because you've got, all those teams that are going to be worse. No matter what, because like I say, as long as you have Bam on the roster, like you're literally like, even if Jimmy like this is not happening, don't aggregate this. Even if you decide, well, I'm just not playing, I'm staying home because you're not giving me a new contract. Literally with Bam on the roster, like they're not going to be as bad as 5 of the teams in that conference. There's just no way. So it's okay. Are we trying to really compete? And I think that will play into how much some of these young guys play, and sort of what roles they have going forward. But I think Ware's going to be handled like Jovic, and I think it may pay off in the second half of the season. I think we'll see more of him in that last third of the season than we see in the first 2/3. And also, I think it's very possible that we could see more of Larsson and or Johnson than we see of Ware. And I've said that before, but I think Johnson is just so easy to play. But you're probably right that it's probably insurance for Haywood. for this year.
Well, we know the cycle. It's going to be no Ware early in the season, Ware late in the season, and then Haywood back up 5 in the playoffs. That's the cycle.
Right. I mean, you got to take into the whole thing about. Well, we should have had an episode about will he play bigs, not will he play young players, because I think that's Ware has two things working against him. All right. Anyway, want to thank Brady for joining here again. I mentioned the real estate shop. Check them out. The real estate shop FL.com. We'll be hearing more about that going in the future. They'll be a sponsor of our post game show, so we appreciate that as well. Prize Picks, use the code 5 FIVE.